search the world, but it couldn't fill me. A man's empty praise and treasures that fade are never enough. Then you came along and put me back together, and every desire is now satisfied here in your love. Oh, there's nothing better than you. There's nothing better than you, Lord. There's nothing is better than you. Yeah, I'm not afraid to show you my weakness, my failures and flaws. Lord, you've seen them all, and you still call me friend. The God of the mountain is the God of the valley, and there's not a place your mercy and grace won't find me again. Oh, there's nothing better than you. There's nothing better than you, Lord. There's nothing is better than you. You turn mourning to dancing. You give beauty for ashes. You turn shame into glory. You're the only one who can. You turn graves into gardens. You turn bones into armies. You turn seas into highways. You're the only one who can. There's nothing better than you. There's nothing better than you, Lord. There's nothing is better than you. Oh, there's nothing better than you. There's nothing better than you, Lord. There's nothing is better than you. Yeah. You turn graves into gardens. You turn bones into armies. You turn seas into highways. You're the only one who can. You're the only one who can. You're the only one who can.
Amen. Please be seated. Good to have you here with us this morning. Let me do a little house cleaning from last week. So I hope that relieves my earworm. I'll be talking about a lady named Sylvia in the sermon today, and my mind has been unable to change the channel from Sylvia's mother set. Do you remember the 1970s? Dr. Hook and the Medicine Company? And Sylvia's mother said, I don't know what she said. I can't remember the lyrics. You turn graves into... So, in 1988, about 2 months into my first pastorate, was a little church. The first Sunday that I was there, they all came out. There were 20 of them. I got a call at home after about 2 months at 11 o'clock at night. You should know that that's reserved for emergencies only. I'm not chatty at 11 o'clock at night. And Sylvia was on the line. She was fully triggered by the time she decided to call me. And when I said hello, she launched into this. She demanded that I stop messing around with the way that church operated. And what she was referencing was this. I was surprised to find in my first couple of weeks there that the way that they took care of the money in the church, they sent the plates around and then they went to the back of the church. The head usher, Sylvia's father, as it turned out, always came to church in farmer bib overalls. Do you remember those? Big pockets here, big pockets, right? And so their method was he would just collect all of the checks and cash and he'd put them in a pocket. And then he would go home, and he'd put the money on the dresser or on the table or whatever. They lived just outside of town. And if they decided to go to town that week, then he would take the money with him, and he'd deposit it, and then he'd bring the deposit check. I'm sure he was a very honest man. I had no reason to suspect him, but you can't do that. Even young Steve with no experience at all knew that isn't right. That can't cut it. So I called an all-church meeting, which was relatively easy to do. Sylvia's family, 8 of them out of the 20, right, dominated that. And I decided in real time, probably not wise to take a vote on this matter. So what I did was I used the power and the authority of the Episcopal office. Man, that sounds nice to say, doesn't it? What did Creel do today? He used the power and the authority of the Episcopal office. And I read that august group the rules of the Rocky Mountain Annual Conference of the United Methodist Church. And the rules say you can't be putting money in your pocket and taking it home and deciding you'll deposit it whenever it's convenient for you. That's not right. What you're supposed to do is have 2 people count it, put it in a common bag, both of them sign for it, and then have somebody deposit it the next morning. So I just explained to him that's how we're going to do it because this is not good. It's not good for Ray, who was the man who put the money in his pockets, not good for the church, not good for anything. And in my mind, that went like this. They sat in that meeting and said, how wonderful it is to have a leader with integrity who wants us to do. Sometimes I'm not really dialed into the full reality of the situation that I'm in. So Sylvia called at 11 o'clock at night, and she told me in no uncertain terms to quit saying that her family were a bunch of thieves, which I not only had not said, I didn't think. Ray was a good guy, salt of the earth. I grew up in country. Right? Lots of people like Ray. He was helping the church out, and anyway, I didn't say it. I'm guilty of lots of stuff, but I wasn't guilty of that. And then she kind of caught fire like a good evangelist. That'll come up again in this story. And by the time she was through, she had accused me of quite a few things. I was not quite 30, and I was working on 2 things in my personal development. The first was no cursing. I grew up in a place where cursing was common. It was the native language of my land. And my last sermon in Texas, I sat down, and the church was absolutely still. And I knew either that was a boffo sermon and the Spirit is present, or conversely, I didn't just think that word, I might have said it out loud. True story, right? So I sat there that day and I found a new level of faith. I promised God, I'm going to give it up. I'm going to stop it, right? I can't be doing this for the rest of my life wondering what I just said. So as Sylvia called, cursing was off the table, and that would have been my normal response before I got all religious. The second thing was self-control, and I won't even tell you why, but so I limited my remarks to Sylvia to this. She said, I'm going to get you removed from that church, and I'm going to make sure the Methodist church doesn't ordain you. And I said, well, I don't care what you do. Just don't call me again at 11 o'clock or I'll make you regret it. And then I hung up on Sylvia. Can I get an amen? I'm telling you, friends, that showed great restraint. I kind of had a glow about me. I felt closer to Jesus than I had for a long time. Great restraint, right? That's all I did was threaten her a little bit vaguely and hang up on her. So Today we're going to look at forgiveness. And forgiveness is the third of the 4 steps in the forgiveness challenge. It's actually how you forgive. I hope to challenge some of your conceptions about forgiveness based on my own misconceptions for a lot of my life. I always thought forgiveness meant I had to have a warm feeling towards the person I forgave, that there had to be a kind of reconciliation of the hearts and you get into a much better relationship or whatever. And I'll tell you up front, doesn't mean that at all, not even close. It can. Marilyn and I, if we get a little sideways or whatever, forgiveness includes a restoration of the relationship, and oftentimes it gets better. So it can have that effect. But if that's what's holding you back, the feeling like it would be wrong for you to pretend you had forgiven somebody because you still don't like them, that's not valid. You don't have to like them. You don't have to fall in love with them. You don't have to do anything. Forgiveness, oddly, is not about the person you're trying to forgive. Forgiveness is about your relationship with God. And I want you to think about it as we talk today as a type of surrender to God, not to the person. So forgiveness in its essence is as simple as this. You say to God, I've come to the place in my heart where I am willing now to say, I forgive them. And what that means is I'm leaving what happens to them up to you, and I'm going to quit pretending to be God by plotting things I'd like to do or say to them. I will no longer pursue vengeance or equaling the score or justice or whatever. Right? I'm out. As far as this situation goes, I turn it over to you, and I'm going to try to learn to live forward. That's what forgiveness is. It does include sometimes the heart follows, but really it's a contract, a covenant that you make with God of your own free will, and it's simply you saying, I'm not really qualified to be the judge in this case, so I'll let you be the judge, and I'm going to get on about my business. Can you hear that when I say it? And when you understand that's what it is, and when you also understand you're not going to get that right, almost as soon as you tell God, I'm going to forgive this person, you're going to revert to old habits, old ways of thinking, etc. The point isn't that you have to be perfect in forgiveness before you give forgiveness. The point is when you say to God, here's what I'm going to do, then you ask God to walk with you and help you learn to do it as you go. So forgiveness is a much stranger thing than we tend to think emotionally. I'll remind you of this. The forgiveness of God for humanity took place on a gruesome cross with the death of his son's flesh. So that was not a case of everybody weeping and holding hands and singing Kumbaya. That was a covenant that God made with us. Here it is. You may pick it up if you want, but in order to pick it up, in order to have the forgiveness, you have to let me be God, and you have to be obedient. That's what forgiveness means. So keep that in mind as we go through the rest of Sylvia's story and some other stuff. I'm going to read the scripture to you today. It is, for me, the central teaching in the New Testament on forgiveness. Matthew 6, 5 through 15. All right. And when you pray, you must not be like the hypocrites. This is Jesus teaching. For they love to stand and pray in the synagogues and at the street corners that they can be seen by others. Truly, I say to you, they have received their reward. But when you pray, go into your room and shut the door and pray to your Father who is in secret, and your Father who sees in secret will reward you. And when you pray, do not heap up empty phrases as the Gentiles do, for they think that they will be heard for their many words. Do not be like them, for your Father knows what you need before you ask him. Pray then like this: Our Father in heaven, hallowed be your name. Your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. The prayer that Jesus taught is all about our submission to God's will and way. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our debts as we also have forgiven our debtors. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For if you forgive others their trespasses, your heavenly Father will also forgive you. But if you do not forgive others' trespasses, neither will your Father forgive your trespasses. May the Lord add blessing to the reading of Scripture. I would say that situationally, the truth that emerges in a Christian life is God has made forgiveness accessible to anyone who desires it, but it can't be actualized, it can't be accessed and become operative in you until you are willing to let it flow through you. That's what's being described. So it isn't, to me, so much legalism as it is you can ask God for forgiveness for your sins, but that doesn't change how and who you are until you are willing to try to let it flow through you and to give what you have received to others. So it is necessary to learn about forgiveness and to practice, literally, like any skill set, practice forgiveness until you can create that channel in you where the reception of God's grace and forgiveness for you becomes your willingness to forgive and to grace other people. And then, at least in my experience, the things that our Christian faith promise begin to crystallize and actualize in your life. You are actually calmer. You do have more peace. You have a rosier view of yourself and of other people and of the purpose of life. All of that happens. The faith becomes real only in so much as we contribute to it by being willing to pass along what God has given to us. Okay, so the third step of forgiveness is the act of making a covenant with God to forgive. It's important to note, again, you don't have to feel sweet or kind toward whoever has hurt you. Hopefully, in step one, you've done a good job of restoring their humanity. And in step two of measuring the hurt, recognizing sometimes it feels like it hurts a lot more than is merited by the situation. For example, Sylvia. I really never suggested to anybody that I thought Ray was up to stealing any money, because I didn't. But she received that on top of 100 insults over her lifetime in a variety of ways, some probably from the church and some other people, right? She received it, so it drove her almost insane because someone had corrected something that someone in her family was doing. So as horrible as that is, and as bad as it made Sylvia act, think for just a moment of how isolated and horrible it would be to be in Sylvia's shoes. To be so easily triggered that situation would cause you to threaten somebody's livelihood. That's a type of insanity. And all of us get triggered in certain instances, and we get triggered because we haven't done the work of letting go and forgiving as we went along. So it makes us ripe for really horrible behavior and for reacting to situations, and it displays the worst of humanity in and through our lives. The penalty for not forgiving, for holding on to grudges and wanting revenge or wanting fairness, whatever it might be, is pretty severe in that it isolates and imprisons the person who was in the right in the first place. One different way to say it. When you don't forgive, instead of making a covenant with God, you make a covenant with the people that have hurt you, and the covenant is, I will serve you for the rest of my life. I'll give you the ability to cause me to be triggered. I'll let you make me mean-spirited and angry more than I want to be. I give my life to you because you've hurt me. That's the truth of it when you don't forgive. And it's insane, isn't it? Okay. So Sylvia followed through. God bless her. At least she was industrious. In the Methodist Church, if you don't know, the SPR, that's Staff Parish Relations Committee, they're the boss committee of the local church, and they talk to the higher-ups, to the bishop and the muckety-mucks about whether or not they want you as pastor, etc. So Sylvia contacted the chair of the SPR committee and demanded to have a meeting concerning the hideous behavior of the new pastor. Her mother served on the SPR committee, as did Sylvia. Oh, it's a hard world sometimes. Sylvia recused herself from the SPR because she was bringing charges, and even Sylvia knew that ain't right. But her mother said, well, I'm not recusing myself. I'm perfectly capable of listening and seeing who's right. I will tell you that I was dubious about Sylvia's mother's ability to hear the case and decide right, but I had no power, and so we went before the committee. The chair started the meeting by reaching over and flicking the switch on Sylvia's crazy, and off she went. It was surreal and fascinating It's hilarious in a memory, but at the time, I almost had an out-of-body experience. It was like watching a true dyed-in-the-wool Southern evangelist at a tent meeting, right? She was fired up. And she just went down the line from, he said my family were a bunch of thieves and liars, which I didn't do, and she didn't like my preaching, she didn't like the way I dressed, she didn't like my wife. She just went on a smear campaign, and as she lathered up, she got better at it, right? It just started coming. And I recognize now, probably a quarter of the way into her demolition of me, she was no longer talking about me. She really wasn't, right? She kept saying Steve, but she was talking about people from her past because Sylvia was in prison, right? She was so fully triggered that it wasn't about me anymore, making a suggestion that we should obey the rules when it comes to money. It was about a whole lifetime of hurt and anger and hatred that she had pent up, and she was on a roll. Her mom was there. I thought, kind of leaning into it and encouraging her, and the SPR committee was, they looked like wind was blowing, right? Wow. Anyway, as a preacher, I will say I admired it. By the time she was done talking about what a horrible, horrible, hopeless cause I am, I did no longer like myself. I was suspicious of me too, and I kind of thought I was glad they didn't ask me to vote because I might have voted to run me out of ministry too. She had herself a time. So Sylvia finished. And it was my turn. Remember, we're on a self-improvement kick, no cursing. That limits your options. Right? I was just swirling. You can imagine, you would have been too, right? Your mind would have been whirling around. Well, I don't even know what just happened, right? Everybody was kind of shocked because even if I had set my mind to it, I couldn't have been that criminal and that evil in that short amount of time. It takes some time to really rub people the wrong way. So throughout this series, we have talked about steps of forgiveness. And that's an unnatural way to talk about the process of forgiveness. It's necessary just to break out the various components of it. But like grief, they don't happen necessarily in perfect order. They get all mixed around. In the first step, we say, tell the story until you can humanize the other person. Because when somebody harms us, it triggers us, like it did Sylvia, and we begin to see them as the embodiment of evil or wrong because we're bleeding a bunch of emotions that we haven't dealt with as Christians into the thing. And so the story that we tell originally is Sylvia's story, right? It's just off base and crazy, and it over-exaggerates, and sometimes it falls into absolute lies. It's not just Sylvia. I've done it. That's how I recognize it. You have too. Even if you didn't say it to anybody, when you rehearsed it in your mind, that person became more and more evil, more and more bad, and you seethed and wanted more and more justice, right? We're all justice warriors when it comes to people that have hurt us. But in telling the story, it's not meant to trigger you and fire you up and get you into that crazy space. It's meant to be an exercise in which, in your faith and in your faithfulness to God, you will yourself to at least be able to tell the story this way. I was hurt by a person who it is apparent has been hurt a lot in their life. They treated me this way because they acted the same way towards me that I sometimes act towards other people when I have had a boatload of hurt. To humanize the other person doesn't mean, and it's okay, therefore it's okay. It's okay with me that Sylvia stood up and told lies, and it's not okay with me. It's wrong. But I understand why she did it. I've seen it enough. I've been in it enough. I can at least recognize her humanity. My wish is that she'd done it to somebody else and I could have rescued them, not done it to me. We tell the story until we're telling the story about a human being who hurt a human being, or sometimes many human beings who have hurt a human being. And that's so important, not just to be able to forgive the individual that you're working on, but because it's a practice in basic living like Jesus. How do you think that he faced the people who would put him to death and still went through the passion out of love for them. He saw the sin and acknowledged it, but more than that, he saw the person and he knew the root of sin. So when we walk these 4 steps and we're writing the story and we're forcing ourselves to think through, how do you get to be like the person that hurt me, right? How does that happen? You have to conjecture some stuff, but if you're a human being, you can do that, right? You know. And when you do that, you are gaining a power that no one really can ever take away from you, and you are gaining in the amount of influence that God has in your life because you're opening up that channel to see your enemies, the people that have harmed you, not as kind of nutty, demonic-filled blackness, but as human beings who you happen to catch at a really bad time, is to be at least stepping forward in the process of being free from their evil. It's important. We're all good at tearing people down, at saying bad things, at thinking bad things, of summing somebody up for just what they've done to us. We're all, right? That would be a short sermon series. Maybe I'll do it next and give you some relief because we're all already experts at it. What we're not good at is recognizing the human being in the darkness. Step 2, then, is reckoning with this very real truth. You likely are triggered by somebody who has done something to you more than you need to be triggered because you're carrying stuff from the past around too, right? I teased and said the SPR chair flicked on Sylvia's switch and off she went. She'd never forgiven anybody. I don't think she forgave her puppy for potting on the floor, right? That was a hard woman. Of course she was easy to trigger. And I know that. Me too. Show any kind of disrespect, especially when I was a younger person, or perceived disrespect, or, my God, on the wrong day, looked the wrong way, and either thought or said, before I gave up cursing, really bad things about you. None of the people that I flashed on in my life ever merited the flash that I gave them, because it wasn't for them. It was to try to relieve the pressure from 100 people prior to that. When you measure the hurt and get serious about that, you're able to rationally say, well, what did Sylvia do? She said that I said things that are patently untrue, and she said it to a bunch of people who were there and know that she was lying. So she didn't actually hurt me at all. Her mother likely already didn't like me because she and Sylvia might have talked. But the other couple folks on the SPR committee, they were there at the infamous meeting where I did not, in fact, accuse Sylvia or her father or anybody in her family of anything. I just said, it's not right for the church to do this. We got to up our ethical game, and the conference has rules, so we're going to do that. So what did Sylvia do to me? Not a doggone thing. She made me mad. She hurt my feelings. She reminded me of people before who had done terrible things to me. There was a professor, there was mom, there was big brothers, but Sylvia didn't really actually do very much to me. She annoyed me, and I had to go to an extra meeting. I don't love meetings. Doesn't that sound different? So Sylvia was done. It was my turn. Again, it's hard, that self-improvement stuff. If you've ever tried it, man, that's hard. All my best weapons had to stay holstered. And I kind of figured, well, at least I will be a record-breaking United Methodist, right? Shortest appointment as a United Methodist pastor in the history of the faith. I also figured this, to be honest with you, and this was as clear to me as it could be in real time. I don't have to be a United Methodist to preach. God called me to preach. I know that. I don't need anybody to approve it or say it's okay or that they agree. Don't care about anybody else's opinion. I know what's going on inside, so if the Methodists won't have me, then Baptists ain't always paying attention. I'll go be one of them. Really, right? I kind of self-limited the damage that she could do. It wasn't like my whole life was dedicated to being a United Methodist clergy. I just happened to have dated a pretty girl who was United Methodist and became one myself. So I figured the calling is a calling, and I don't need a denomination. I'll just go find someplace to preach. So I stood and addressed the committee, and I said, well, Sylvia's lying, and everybody here knows it. I talked with more of a drawl back then. So I reckon what you got to do is choose. Either Sylvia runs the church or I run the church. And then the chair asked Sylvia and myself to go wait in the hall together. Right? It is true in our lives, right? Sometimes the will of God is exercised in this way. You get pushed to find out just how much self-improvement kick you are on. So we stood out in the hall right next to the door, and I guess we both had the same plan. We stood very quietly like church mice, and we tried very hard to discern what meant. So I became a Christian when I was, I think, 6 or 7 years old. I answered an altar call because I knew I was full of sin, and it was, even as a child, right? I was in a sinful atmosphere. And when the preacher said, look, if you want to have a life that's worth having, you got to accept Jesus and learn to follow him, I was all in. My family was shocked and unhappy, by the way, because I was the first one to reveal maybe things aren't what they seem at the Creel household. But I toddled down the central aisle, and the pastor held my hand and accepted me just like he did the adults who came down that day. And I went through a class, and I got myself baptized. And for the next 40-some years, if I tell the truth, Christianity was a profound disappointment, but an ever-burning hope. I thought he said clearly, if you come down and accept Jesus, your life gets better. I did that, and my life didn't get better. But I believed him enough that I kept trying. I kept trying to know the thing you're supposed to know, and I kept trying to think the stuff you're supposed to think, and I innocently believed there'd come a point where I got to a place somehow where I was finally free. So that's when I gave my life to Jesus. I was saved in this church, standing right where I am, many years later, as I preached on forgiveness, because here's what I knew. People in the church, this church, they needed to learn to forgive. And in the middle of preaching, God struck me hard, and I came to know I am telling them they have to do something that I never do, I don't want to do, and I don't actually believe is good. Really, it was a startling moment. I yabber for a living, so I yabbered the rest of that sermon out, whatever, closed up shop, went home, and just wept because it occurred to me that God probably doesn't like frauds in that way. And that breakdown led me to pursue, well, if the church is all about forgiveness, what in the world does it mean? Which over a painful, difficult couple of years internally led to my coming to grips with there's a process here that I've never, ever pursued, and there's a reason. You're forgiven only in so much as you are willing to at least try to forgive other people. And that changed my life forever. It never will be the same. I still get triggered. I still get angry. If you know me, you know I'm not perfect. Maybe the difference is I no longer think I am. But I'm more free than I ever was before. And the promise of that altar call got fulfilled when I took seriously the heart of our faith, which is forgiveness. So they called us back in. And I knew I'd been thoroughly whipped in the debate. So sat down, and I was already, I don't linger long in loss, right? So I was already thinking, how am I going to explain this to my wife, and what's my next step? And the chair said, we have a unanimous vote. And then she turned to Sylvia, and she said, Sylvia, we've seen you treat every one of us and a bunch of other people exactly like you're treating him. And we know what you said isn't true. So we're going to go with Steve. Wow. And then the Lord gave me wisdom, and every decision I ever made as pastor of that church was right, and it was amazing. I was literally stupefied, right? The stupefied means you're struck dumb. You just go, what happens? Because my first thought was, oh my God, Sylvia's own mother voted against her. If I had conjured some kind of terrible thing to happen to Sylvia, I would never have come up with something so delicious. Her mother was a part of it, right? All those in favor of getting rid of Sylvia? It was a wonder to me. Time slowed down and stuff was going on. I don't know exactly what happened next. And then Sylvia brought my attention back. Sylvia stood up and with a flourish, got her coat and her purse, and she told all of them, including her mother, "That's it, I'm done with you losers," right? "I quit this church. You can have him and you can go to hell." Wow. Gotta admire Sylvia a little bit. Yeah, she just got her teeth knocked in the situation, but she was defiant to the end. And then she marched out of the room. And then everything was great until the SPR chair stood up and marched after her. And I knew, doggone it, she's manipulated them enough that that chair's going to go and apologize, and she's going to say, "We'll meet halfway in the middle. Maybe he did lie a little bit." She brought Sylvia back into the room, and you go, "Man, I hate this movie. I already know the ending." But what she said was, "Sylvia, I want the whole committee to know this, and I want it put in the notes. We heard what you said. You quit. We didn't kick you out of the church. So don't you go around telling people that we said anything we didn't. You're not going to treat us like you did him." And you go, "This is no longer about me." Wow, this is amazing. And that's all true story, right? And then Sylvia left. Can I get an amen? It only happened the one time in my life, but well, how wonderful and delicious was that? In the absence of Sylvia, in a couple of weeks after those events, we were visited by two couples who went to the University of Colorado in Boulder. The church was in Boulder, and they were so homesick. One grew up in Kansas and one grew up in Nebraska out on the plains, and they had just decent little small town churches. And they came to Boulder and they went to a couple of churches, and those were not at all anything like they were used to. And it made them feel more isolated and uncertain about why they should have gone to the big city instead of, in their cases, a state college that would have been familiar to them. And we advertised ourselves. I advertised us as the city church with a country atmosphere, which means the little tiny dying city church that's led by a hick. But the advertisement worked. They came and they fell in love with us. About a month later, one of them, who was a music major, came and actually asked permission and said, "Can I start a choir?" And you go, "Is it a trick question?" Choir started up. They began to recruit other married students, mostly who lived in the married student dorms. And by the summertime, we had a softball team that was actually really good because it was all college kids. And we had a couples group, and we had people who were going door to door in the neighborhood putting out our flyer. And the church grew. I wish I could tell you that it was because of some master plan that I had, but it wasn't. It was just a healthy, safe place. And those kids, when they came to church on Sunday, they knew they were going to be greeted by Sylvia's mother and by the other little old ladies in the church, and they were going to be loved. And the thing prospered, and it was just such a sweetness. It was so good that the United Methodist Church said, "Well, we can't have Creel there for very long, right? We've got to send him someplace else." So they told me that I was going to be moved out to Julesburg, which was another good church in my life. And Mardell, who was the SPR chair, she was obviously my friend and a person that I was devoted to because she had stood up for me. And man, that'll make high marks for you, right? And she called me when the announcement was made, and she said, "Oh, we're so sorry to be losing you. Let me take you out to lunch to celebrate our time together." And I was imagining, at the very least, a steak sandwich, maybe an appetizer. She said, "I'll meet you at the food court at the mall." And you go, "Oh." But I love Mardell, so, it was her presence. And we did. We met and sat down at a table, and then we each went to our little, there's lots of little restaurant fronts or whatever, and got our meal, and we came and we sat at the table. And Mardell talked about the stuff we had done and how nice it had been to see me mature. That's been something that's said at every church I've been in. I keep thinking if I pastor till I'm 80, nobody's going to see me mature anymore. And there were, in the food court, there were workers, bus people who took care of the tables and kind of swept up the trash and just kept the place clean. They wore horrible uniforms. I can literally recall them instantly because it's just crazy. They were vertical stripes, about an inch each stripe, and they were orange and brown and yellow, and they were on the top, I know, and they were on the pants, and then to top it off, some genius decided to put a kind of French chef hat on them that flopped over to the side because that's elegant, and it was also striped that way, right? You just go. We finished our lunch, and our trays were there, and whatever, and one of the workers came over. It was Sylvia. Honest to God. I looked up at the person walking towards the table, locked eyes with Sylvia, and we both had the same reaction, right? Like electricity. And God bless her, she just decided that she didn't see me. But she did see Mardell, so she stopped and she talked to Mardell, and Mardell said, well, how long have you been working here at the mall? And Sylvia said, about a year or so. I really like it, flexible hours or whatever. And then she busted her table and she left, and I knew this, doggone it. Mardell set me up. She full well knew Sylvia worked at the food court, and she wanted me to come here to see the devil one more time before I went on to heaven. You know that was true. She could have taken me to a place that had appetizers. So, sitting there in the stench of what had been a horrible thing, I asked Mardell, what happened? Sylvia's husband worked for the railroad, which was a good paying gig, had benefits, and they had a nice home. Part of the way she lorded it over people in that little church was she simply had more wealth and therefore more power than anybody else in the church. But something had happened, and Mardell said, I don't really know. I discovered that she was working here a couple of months ago, and so once a week I come just to be able to talk to her. I want her to know that I'm not mad at her and that I still love her. Wow. That's the way to ruin a really nice lunch. Serious, I was feeling good about the way things had gone at the church. I was looking forward to the challenge of Julesburg, right? And there I was, sitting in my own filth now because Mardell was actually doing the Christian thing, and I had no intent, right? Inside, I was thinking, that's hilarious. I wish I could take a picture of Sylvia. Do you hear what I'm saying? I won the fight with Sylvia, but I didn't win anything at all. Mardell won the fight with Sylvia, and then she went on to win more. So, this story does not conclude with God touching my heart and me forgiving Sylvia. Right then, I left that town still not understanding why God insisted on forgiveness all the time and still thinking it was hilarious that Sylvia had gotten what for. But over the years, when I revisited the story, and this is the first time I've ever told it publicly, I'll tell you, a conundrum arose for me. And the conundrum was, I was raised in a really poor environment. And we valued above everything else hard work. You could be a pretty hard, not very nice person, but if you showed up to your job every day and you did what you were supposed to do, and in our language, earned their paycheck, then you were to be admired. That was drilled into me, right? Whether it was taking the trash out or whether it was my first job, which was in 4th grade, cleaning up a barbershop. The essence of life in the community I grew up in was a man works hard for his money, and he's honorable in that, and whatever else happens, not that important. So all those years, when I thought back to it, I knew Sylvia, whatever happened to her life, went out and got herself a job, and she showed up and did it, even though it must have been humiliating for her, because it wouldn't have been just me that went there and saw her in her estate. But she swallowed her pride, and she went to work, and she did what she was supposed to do. She made it better as best she could in the most honorable way. What do you do when you come to know that you have great respect for somebody that you hate? Well, if you're me, you wait about another 30 years or so. And then one day, while you're working the forgiveness challenge on another person, another prominent woman in my life, you realize, wow, I just made peace in this situation, and I no longer think of Sylvia in the way that I used to. I'm actually at a point where when I look back at that story, instead of seeing a monster that lit me up when I didn't even know enough to defend myself, I see a woman who must have been just on the edge of her sanity. So broken and harmed and hurt and full of pain was she that she acted that way in public. And in some way, it must have destroyed the whole fabric of her life. And then I was able to pray to God, thank you for Sylvia, and I hope that you have been blessing her wherever she is. Isn't that crazy how it works? I didn't even really want to forgive her, but she got thrown in with the work I was doing on somebody else. Anyway, if it's dark where you are and you're easily triggered and you still think somebody else is the problem in your life and you believe if you could just get even with them, everything would be all right, if you're still insane and it swirls around you and you don't know how to get out of it, I promise you, you just need to be saved. And the definition of being saved is give your life over to Jesus and do what he asks. You forgive other people the same as you ask for forgiveness, and it gets better in a hurry.